Imagine you wake up one morning and everything is gone. Your house, your money, your career, your kids are still inside the city, but you're standing outside the gates and someone just told you, if you ever set foot in here again, we'll burn you alive. That's not a movie. That actually happened to a real person. And instead of picking up a sword, he picked up a pen. And what he wrote with that pen, it changed the entire course of human civilization. Today, we're talking about Dante Alighieri. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to see him completely differently than whatever you learned in school. Because school taught you he wrote some old Italian poem about heaven and hell. But what school didn't tell you is why he wrote it. What happened to this man that pushed him to create something so raw, so personal, so savage, that he literally put the Pope in hell while the Pope was still alive? Let's go back, way back. The year is 1265. The city is Florence, Italy. Now, when most people think of Florence today, they think of art galleries, cobblestone streets, tourists eating gelato in front of beautiful old churches. But the Florence that Dante was born into, that was a completely different animal. This was a city that was rich. Yeah, dangerously rich. Florence had basically invented international banking. The whole of medieval Europe was running on Florentine money. English kings borrowed from Florentine bankers to fund their wars. Sicilian nobles borrowed Florentine money to build their palaces. The Florentine gold coin, the florin, was the US dollar of the medieval world. Everyone used it, everyone trusted it, everyone wanted it. But here's the thing about cities that get very rich very fast. The politics becomes absolutely brutal. And 13th century Florence was a city at war with itself, not a cold war. An actual war. Families against families. Neighborhoods against neighborhoods. People getting dragged out of their homes in the middle of the night. Houses burned. Entire extended families thrown out of the city and forced to live as refugees somewhere else. The split was basically this. You had two factions called the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. The Guelphs supported the Pope and the Church's political authority. The Ghibellines supported the Holy Roman Emperor. And this wasn't just a political disagreement like Democrats versus Republicans. This was the kind of disagreement where if your side lost, you lost everything. Your property, your freedom, sometimes your life. Dante was born into a Guelph family, which meant he was born on the side that believed the Pope should have supreme authority over Italian politics. That's important to remember later, because Dante's opinion on this is going to change dramatically. His full name was Dante Alighieri. Everyone called him Dante. His family wasn't rich exactly, but they had a decent reputation in the city. His dad was a businessman and moneylender. Nothing spectacular. His mom died when he was very young. His dad remarried. Life went on the way life did in medieval Florence. Loud, chaotic, politically charged, and genuinely dangerous. But then something happened to Dante when he was 9 years old. Something so small, so ordinary, that it seems almost ridiculous that it changed the course of world literature. He saw a girl. Her name was Beatrice Portinari. She lived in the same neighborhood. Her father was a wealthy banker, and Dante, this 9-year-old kid at some neighborhood gathering, saw her across the room, and something just broke open inside him. Now look, I know what you're thinking. 9 years old? That's just a crush, right? Kids get crushes. It's not that serious. But here's the thing. Dante didn't see her again for 9 years. 9 years. And the whole time, she's living inside his head, this image of her, this feeling from that one moment. When he finally sees her again at age 18, she's walking down a street with two older female relatives. She looks at him, smiles slightly, and says a brief greeting. That's it. That's the whole interaction. She was already married to someone else by then, a rich banker named Simone de Bardi, and Dante himself was already promised in an arranged marriage to a woman named Gemma Donati from a powerful Florentine family. The match had been arranged when Dante was barely 12 years old, which was completely normal for the time. But that one smile from Beatrice, It wrecked him. He went home that same night and wrote a sonnet about it. He sent the sonnet to other poets in Florence because that was actually a thing back then. Poets would send each other poems and respond to each other like some medieval version of Twitter. One of the poets who wrote back was a man named Guido Cavalcanti, and this response began one of the most important literary friendships in history. Guido and Dante became close, became collaborators, became co-founders of an entirely new style of poetry they called Dolce Stile Novo, the sweet new style. The idea was simple but revolutionary. They believed love wasn't just a physical thing, a desperate wanting of another person's body. They believed love was a ladder. That genuine love for another human being could actually elevate your soul, pull it upward toward God, make you more than you were. Beatrice, in Dante's mind, wasn't just a woman. She was a symbol. She was living proof that the divine could walk around in human form, which sounds beautiful. And it is beautiful. But let's be honest about what was also happening here. Dante was in a marriage he barely mentions in any of his writing. He and Gemma had children together, at least 3 sons and a daughter. But he almost never wrote about her. Not a single poem, not a single dedication. She doesn't even appear by name in his masterwork. Meanwhile, the woman he saw twice, spoke to maybe once, who was married to someone else her entire adult life. She became the guiding light of his entire existence. Make of that what you will. Now in 1289, Dante did something very different from writing love poetry. He went to war. The Battle of Campaldino, June 11th, 1289. Florence's Guelph army against the Ghibellines of Arezzo. Dante was there, not as a bystander. He rode in the cavalry, which means he was at the front of the fighting. He watched people die in front of him. He saw what a human body looks like when it's torn apart by a medieval battle. He saw horses go down screaming. He smelled what a battlefield smells like an hour after the fighting stops. He survived. And 2 months later, he participated in a siege near Pisa. These experiences mattered because when he later wrote about hell, about the suffering of the damned, there was nothing abstract about it. He had seen real suffering, real horror, real violence. He knew exactly what screaming in agony sounded like, and he used that knowledge. Then in 1290, the worst thing happened. Beatrice died. She was 24 years old. Nobody knows exactly why. Illness, probably. The medieval world was brutal about that. One day she was alive, then she wasn't, and Dante came apart. He wrote later that when he heard the news, he felt like the whole city of Florence had become a widow. He shut himself inside his grief, and he couldn't find a way out of it. He started reading philosophy. Cicero, Boethius, anyone who had written about how to survive unbearable loss. He attended theology lectures at churches around Florence. He was desperately searching for something to hold on to. Out of this grief came his first major work, the Vita Nuova, which translates as The New Life. It's a book unlike anything that existed before it. Part autobiography, part poetry collection, part love story, part spiritual confession. He told the whole story of his love for Beatrice, how he first saw her, what she meant to him, the terror of losing her. And at the very end of that book, in the last pages, he made a promise. He wrote that he would one day write something about her that had never been written about any woman before. He was planting a seed. He didn't know yet what that promise would eventually cost him. Because meanwhile, Florence was becoming even more politically insane. By the 1290s, the old Guelph versus Ghibelline split had been replaced by something almost more confusing. The Guelphs, Dante's people, the Pope's people had split into 2 sub-factions, the White Guelphs and the Black Guelphs. The Whites were more moderate, believed Florence should have some independence from Rome. The Blacks were hardcore papists, directly backed by Pope Boniface VIII, and they wanted total church control over Florentine politics. Dante was on the white side, and he wasn't just a supporter. By 1300, he was elected to the highest executive office in Florence, one of 6 priors who actually ran the city. This was the peak of political power. This was Dante at his most influential, and almost immediately, it cost him everything. In May of 1300, the white and black Guelphs were literally fighting in the streets. Armed clashes, people dying. The city was on the edge of open civil war. Dante and the other priors made the painful decision to exile the leaders of both factions from Florence, and that included Dante's own closest friend, Guido Cavalcanti, who got so sick during his exile that he died before he could come back. Dante sacrificed his best friend for the sake of the city, and the city thanked him by destroying him. Here's what happened. Pope Boniface VIII wanted the Black Guelphs in power. He arranged for Charles of Valois, the French king's brother, to come to Florence with a massive army under the pretense of keeping the peace. While this was being organized, the Pope summoned a diplomatic delegation from Florence to come talk to him in Rome. Dante was one of the ambassadors sent, and while Dante was in Rome talking to the Pope, the trap closed behind him. Charles of Valois entered Florence. The Black Guelphs seized power. They looted and burned the homes of white Guelph families. Dante's house was among those sacked. When Dante tried to return to Florence in early 1302, he discovered that the new Black Guelph government had charged him in absentia with corruption, embezzlement of public funds. All of it was fabricated. Everyone knew it was fabricated, but it didn't matter. The sentence was a massive fine, and when he couldn't or wouldn't pay it, the sentence became permanent exile. And then they added a line that still seems almost medieval in its cruelty, which I suppose is appropriate since it was medieval. The decree stated that if Dante Alighieri ever set foot in Florence again, he would be burned alive. He was 37 years old. He had children inside that city. He had a wife inside that city, though their relationship is basically a mystery since he never wrote about her. His whole world was inside that city, and he was standing outside the gates, knowing that if he walked through them, he would be executed. He never went back. Not once. For the last 19 years of his life, he was a wanderer, a refugee, a man without a home. He spent time in Verona, in Bologna, in various courts across northern Italy. He was dependent on the generosity of powerful men who were willing to host a famous but stateless poet. He had to be careful constantly. Say the wrong thing about the wrong person's patron and your protection disappears. In those early years of exile, he still had some hope of going back. He joined an alliance of white Guelph exiles who were trying to retake Florence by force. They allied with their old enemies, the Ghibellines, because that's what desperation looks like. In the summer of 1302, their military attempt failed. Then there was a political attempt that also failed. Then another military attempt in 1304, 1,500 cavalry, 9,000 infantry, and that failed too, completely and humiliatingly. After that last defeat, Dante was done. He severed ties with his white Guelph allies, apparently in absolute fury, calling them, and I love this, an evil and foolish lot. He was finished trying to fight his way home. He had to become something else. So he became a writer, not just a poet, a thinker, a philosopher, a political theorist, a linguist. During his years of wandering, he wrote an unfinished philosophical work called The Convivio, The Banquet, in which he laid out his evolving political views. He wrote a treatise on vernacular language in which he argued, radically for his time, that Italian dialects were legitimate vehicles for serious literature. He wrote a political tract in Latin called De Monarchia, in which he argued that the Pope and the Emperor received their authority independently from God, and that the Pope had absolutely no business meddling in secular politics. That last one was so dangerous that it was actually burned by papal order after Dante's death. They burned books because of what was written in them. That's how seriously people took these ideas. But all of this, all the wandering, all the writing, all the theorizing, all was preparation. Because at some point during these exile years, Dante started writing the thing he had promised at the end of the Vita Nuova, the thing Beatrice had been waiting for. He called it the Commedia. We call it the Divine Comedy, though Dante himself didn't use the word divine. That was added later by admirers. And here is what makes this work different from anything that came before it. Other writers of the time wrote about heaven and hell as abstract theological concepts, places you go after you die. Dante made them specific. Dante made them architectural. Dante walked through them himself as a character in his own story and described what he saw with the precision of a man who had been there. The poem begins on Good Friday in the year 1300. Dante is 35 years old, exactly half of the biblical lifespan of 70 years. He finds himself lost in a dark forest. He doesn't know how he got there. He doesn't know how to get out. This forest is a metaphor, obviously. It's exile, it's depression, it's the spiritual and moral confusion of a man whose entire world has been taken from him. The straight path is lost. He doesn't know where he is anymore. He tries to climb a sunlit hill to get some perspective, to find a way forward, but three animals block his path: a leopard, a lion, a wolf. They represent lust, pride, and greed, respectively, the forces that corrupt both individuals and societies. And then, out of nowhere, a figure appears. It's Virgil, the ancient Roman poet, the man Dante had read his entire life, the writer he considered his greatest teacher. Virgil explains that he's been sent by Beatrice herself from heaven to guide Dante. But here's the thing. The only way out of this dark forest isn't over the hill. The only way out is through. Dante has to go down into hell all the way through it and come out the other side. And so they descend. Hell in Dante's imagination is a funnel-shaped cavity in the earth, reaching down to its very center. It's divided into 9 circles, each one reserved for a different category of sin, each one progressively worse as you go deeper. Outside the gates, there's a crowd of souls who aren't even good enough for hell. People who were so indifferent to everything that neither good nor evil wanted them. They just run around pointlessly, stung by wasps and hornets, chasing a blank banner that goes nowhere. Already, Dante is making a point. He believed that moral indifference, just not caring, just going along with things, was its own kind of damnation. Through the gate, they find the river Acheron. The ferryman Charon brings the dead across, and they enter the first circle, limbo. Limbo is interesting because it's not really a punishment in the physical sense. It's more like a permanent twilight, no fire, no torture, just a kind of beautiful sadness. This is where the virtuous pagans live, people who were good, genuinely good, but who lived before Christianity or who were never baptized, and so are excluded from heaven through no real fault of their own. Dante meets Homer here, Horace, Ovid, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Julius Caesar, and, this is remarkable, he also includes the Muslim warrior Saladin and the Muslim philosopher Avicenna. In a deeply orthodox Christian society, putting Muslims in limbo instead of hell was an act of extraordinary intellectual generosity. Dante is essentially saying, these were good people. They deserve acknowledgement even if they can't reach God. But limbo's sadness is nothing compared to what comes next. The second circle is where the real suffering begins. This is for the lustful, people who let their passion override their reason. Here, a great eternal storm hurls souls through the air, around and around forever, just as in life they were thrown around by their appetites. Here, Dante meets Francesca da Rimini, one of the most heartbreaking figures in the whole poem. She was an Italian noblewoman who fell in love with her husband's younger brother, Paolo. Her husband found out and killed them both. Now they float together through the storm, inseparable even in death. Francesca tells her story, and Dante, this man who built his entire poetic career on love, who devoted his life to longing for a woman he could never have, Dante is so overwhelmed by the tragedy of it that he faints. He collapses to the ground unconscious. That detail matters. Dante isn't cold and clinical as he walks through hell. He reacts. He's moved. He sometimes argues. He sometimes weeps. He's fully present in this horrible place. He wakes up in the third circle. The gluttons. These are people who consumed more than they needed, who made appetite the center of their existence. Now they lie in a cold slush of rain and filth, while the three-headed dog Cerberus tears at them endlessly. Whatever gave them pleasure in life, food, drink, comfort, has become their punishment. What you worship, you become. The fourth circle holds the hoarders and the spendthrifts, people on opposite ends of the same problem, both of whom treated material wealth as the most important thing in life. They push enormous weights at each other, eternally, screaming as they collide. And here's where Dante does something genuinely brave for his time. He specifically notes that many of the souls here are clergymen, popes, cardinals, priests, men who took vows of poverty and then accumulated more wealth than anyone. Dante believed the church had been corrupted by money, and he wasn't subtle about saying so. The fifth circle is the wrathful and the sullen, a black stinking river called the Styx. The angry tear each other apart on the surface. The sullen, people who smothered their anger inward until it became a kind of living death, lie gurgling in the mud underneath. And here, Dante encounters someone personal, Filippo Argenti, a real person, a black Guelph, a man who, after Dante was exiled, apparently took Dante's own property. When Filippo rises from the muck and tries to grab the boat, Dante watches the other souls tear him apart, and rather than express sorrow or mercy, Dante watches with what can only be described as satisfaction. This is the moment where you realize the Divine Comedy is also, in some very real sense, a revenge fantasy. Dante is settling scores. He is the judge now. He decides where people go. They arrive at the walls of the city of Dis, the lower hell, where the truly serious sinners live. The difference between upper hell and lower hell is intent. The people above sinned through weakness. They couldn't control themselves. The people below sinned deliberately, consciously. They chose evil. Fallen angels try to block their entry. Virgil, who represents human reason, is completely powerless here. A divine messenger has to come from heaven to open the gates for them. Inside, the sixth circle holds heretics, people who denied fundamental Christian doctrines. They lie in burning tombs, and many of them are people Dante knew personally or politically. He has a heated argument with a Ghibelline leader named Farinata degli Uberti. They debate Florence's future right there in the middle of hell, which is kind of incredible when you think about it. The seventh circle holds the violent, split into three subcategories. Those who were violent toward others. They're submerged in a river of boiling blood, and centaurs patrol the banks shooting arrows at anyone who tries to rise above their allotted depth. The depth of the blood reflects the degree of their violence. Tyrants are submerged to their eyebrows. Alexander the Great is in there. Various historical and contemporary warlords. Then comes something genuinely strange and disturbing. The violent against themselves, suicides, have been transformed into trees, and harpies, creatures with women's faces and bird bodies, tear at the branches constantly. When the branches bleed, the souls can speak, because the only way they can make sound is through their own pain. It's an extraordinarily dark image, and Dante keeps it moving. He doesn't linger too long on any one image. He walks through hell like a journalist with a deadline. The violent against God and nature are in a burning desert of sand, with fire falling from above like snow, and they must hold different postures depending on their specific sin. The blasphemers lie down and take it. The sodomites walk constantly. The usurers, the people who Dante believed charged excessive interest, crouch down and stare at the pouches of money around their necks. Now they have to go deeper. To cross into the eighth circle, Dante and Virgil ride on the back of a creature named Geryon, a monster with the face of an honest man and the tail of a scorpion. Dante is explicit. This is fraud. Fraud wears a trustworthy face. Fraud seems safe. Fraud will sting you when you're not looking. The eighth circle, called Malbolge, is a massive amphitheater divided into 10 ditches, each holding a different type of fraudster. Panderers and seducers walk in opposite directions while demons whip them. Flatterers wallow in human excrement. Simoniacs, People who bought and sold church offices and sacraments are buried head down in the ground with their feet on fire. Fortune tellers and diviners have their heads twisted backward on their bodies so they can only look behind them. In life, they tried to see the future. Now they can only see the past. Corrupt politicians and bribe takers boil in a pit of hot tar. When they surface, demons with hooks drag them back down. Dante watches this scene with something approaching dark humor. Hypocrites walk in heavy lead robes that look like gold, beautiful on the outside, impossibly heavy on the inside. Thieves are tormented by serpents in a way that's almost too elaborate to summarize. They merge with the snakes, transform back, merge again in endless horrifying metamorphoses. And then the simoniacs. This is where Dante does something extraordinary. He talks to one of the souls buried head down, Pope Nicholas III, who is confused at first because he thinks Dante is Pope Boniface VIII, since he's been told Boniface is arriving soon to join him in this particular pit. And right there, Dante, who is still alive, remember, still walking around in physical body, predicts in his poem that Boniface VIII, his mortal enemy, the Pope who helped engineer his exile, will end up here, buried upside down, on fire, for all eternity. He's calling his shot, while Boniface is alive, while Boniface has power over him. That takes a particular kind of nerve. They reach the ninth circle, the deepest point. And here, all expectations are confounded. There is no fire here, no screaming, no demons with whips. There is only ice. A frozen lake called Cocytus, in which the worst sinners are embedded at varying depths depending on the nature of their betrayal. Those who betrayed family members are in up to their necks. Those who betrayed guests are frozen in ice completely, their faces turned downward. Those who betrayed lords and masters are also completely submerged, faces upward, their tears freezing in their eye sockets before they can fall. Dante gives us one of the most grotesque and haunting images in the poem here. Count Ugolino of Pisa, chewing on the skull of Archbishop Ruggieri. In real life, Ruggieri had imprisoned Ugolino and his sons in a tower and left them to starve to death. Now in hell, forever, Ugolino gnaws on his enemy's head. Whether out of lingering hatred or because there's nothing else to eat, Dante doesn't quite say. And at the very center of hell, frozen from the waist down in the ice, is Lucifer himself. Not the dramatic, heroic Satan of later literature, not a tempter, not a deceiver, just a massive, trapped, mindlessly suffering creature with 3 faces, weeping from all 6 eyes, his giant wings beating the air to create the freezing wind that locks him in place. His 3 mouths chew eternally on 3 figures: Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus, and Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Julius Caesar. The 2 greatest betrayals in Dante's moral universe: betrayal of sacred religious authority and betrayal of sacred political authority. Dante believes both the Church and the Roman Empire were divinely ordained. To betray either is the worst thing a human being can do. Dante and Virgil escape hell by climbing down Lucifer's body, turning at the center of the earth where gravity reverses, and emerging on the other side of the world into the open air. And suddenly they can see stars. After the absolute darkness of hell, they stand under the night sky looking up, and Dante breathes. They're at the base of Mount Purgatory, and everything changes because Purgatory is different. The souls here are not damned. They will eventually reach heaven. They know it. They're working toward it. And that knowledge changes everything. There is hope here. Even in suffering, there is hope. Purgatory is a mountain divided into 7 terraces, each one corresponding to one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, lust. As souls ascend through the terraces, they purge themselves of these inclinations. One by one, the angels carve away their sins, and they become lighter, more themselves, more what they were always meant to be. On the first terrace, the proud carry enormous weights, literal stones on their backs. and are forced to look at ground-level carvings of humility. They can't look up, they can't see the sky, because in life they only looked up, only saw themselves at the center, only considered their own greatness. On the terrace of the envious, souls have their eyelids stitched shut with iron wire. Because in life, they couldn't bear to see others flourishing. Their eyes were a source of poison. Now they have no eyes. What's striking throughout Purgatory is that the souls are kind. They help each other. They want to be there, even though it's painful. A soul named Belacqua, who in real life was a friend of Dante's, a Florentine musical instrument maker famous for his laziness, sits at the base of a rock and tells Dante he has to wait here before he can even start climbing, because he put off repentance until the very last moment. He seems almost amused about this. Dante is genuinely glad to see him. Dante encounters the poet Statius here, who followed Virgil's work as if it were scripture and was secretly converted to Christianity through reading Virgil's poetry. The meeting between Statius and Virgil, the older poet encountering a man whose life he changed without ever knowing it, is genuinely moving. He meets the troubadour Arnaud Daniel, a Provençal poet who Dante considered the greatest love poet who ever wrote. He meets historical figures and personal friends and enemies, and the tone here is gentler than in hell. More human, more complex. At the very top of the mountain is the Garden of Eden, the original paradise before the fall. And here, Virgil stops. Virgil cannot go further. He was born before Christ. He was never baptized. He belongs to limbo. He has brought Dante as far as human reason can take him. But the final steps toward God, human reason cannot make alone. Virgil says goodbye, quietly. Dante doesn't even get to thank him properly. And then Virgil is gone. And in his place comes Beatrice. She appears in a blaze of light and color, borne on a mystical procession. And the first thing she does is scold him. She knows he's gone off track. She knows he wasted years of his life. She is not gentle about it. She makes him cry, makes him confess his failures, makes him look at what he became after she died. The distractions, the intellectual wanderings, the ways he avoided facing his grief honestly. He weeps, and she accepts his tears, and then she takes him upward. Paradise is built on the medieval understanding of the cosmos, the Ptolemaic system, where the earth is at the center and the celestial spheres rotate around it. The moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the fixed stars, the primum mobile, and beyond all of them, the Empyrean, the dwelling place of God, outside of space and time. Each sphere holds souls whose virtues were associated with the qualities of that celestial body. In the moon, souls who failed to keep vows through no fault of their own. In Mercury, those who did good works partly out of ambition. In Venus, lovers. In the sun, the wise theologians. In Mars, the warriors who died for their faith. On Mars, Dante meets the ancestor he is most proud of, Cacciaguida, who died fighting in the Second Crusade. And Cacciaguida does something remarkable. He tells Dante the truth about the exile that's coming, about the hardship, about what it will mean to lose everything and wander and depend on other people's charity. And then he tells Dante not to soften his poem because of it. He says, "Write everything, name names. Tell the truth about everyone, high or low, no matter who it offends, because a voice that only whispers is no voice at all." This is Dante telling himself, through his ancestor's mouth, why this poem has to exist the way it does, why it can't flinch, why it has to put popes in hell and emperors in limbo and friends in purgatory and enemies wherever they deserve to be. In Jupiter, souls form the shape of a great eagle, the symbol of Roman imperial justice. And the eagle speaks about the mystery of divine justice, about how it's impossible for any human to fully understand who gets saved and who doesn't. People who had every chance at salvation and wasted it. People who seemed hopeless and found grace at the last moment. In Saturn, Dante meets the great contemplatives, those who spent their lives in prayer and meditation. and one of them, Saint Peter Damian, launches into a blistering attack on the corruption of the church. He describes the modern clergy, their robes, their horses, their servants, their absolute lack of spiritual life. His words are so fiery that the other souls shout in agreement, and the sound is so overwhelming that Dante can't understand them. At the top of the sphere of fixed stars, Dante is examined by Saints Peter, James, and John on the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. He passes, and Saint Peter, the first pope, the rock on which the church was built, immediately uses this moment to completely savage his successors. He says the seat of the papacy has become a sewer, that Boniface VIII has made Rome into a place of blood and filth, that he himself, looking down at the corruption, is ashamed to call it his church. The most powerful institutional figure in Christendom, calling the Pope a monster. In a poem that millions of people are going to read, Dante was not playing it safe. They pass through the primum mobile and into the empyrean, beyond time, beyond space, beyond anything with material existence. Beatrice leaves Dante's side and ascends to her proper place in the great rose of heaven, a luminous structure where all the blessed souls exist in perfect beatitude, gazing eternally on the light of God. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux takes Dante's hand now, and he prays to the Virgin Mary to allow Dante's human eyes to see the divine light without being destroyed by it. And Dante looks. What he sees, he struggles to describe it. He says language fails. He says his memory can barely hold the shape of it, but he tries. He describes an ocean of light, and in that light, 3 circles of color, like rainbows, but made of pure being. 3 circles, the Trinity, and in the second circle, the shape of a human face, God and humanity, contained within each other, infinite and finite, wrapped together. And in that moment, Dante says, his will and his desire were resolved. Everything that had been pulling him in different directions his entire life, the longing, the politics, the exile, the grief, the rage, it all became still, not suppressed, not denied, just finally at peace, finally aligned with something larger than itself. His desire and his will were turned like a wheel, moved by the love that moves the sun and all the other stars. He finished the poem in 1321. He was 56 years old, living in Ravenna under the patronage of a lord named Guido Novello da Polenta, who had taken him in with genuine warmth and given him the stability to finish his work. After decades of wandering, he had found a kind of peace. His children had come to Ravenna to be with him. His sons Jacopo and Pietro helped him with his work. His daughter Antonia is believed to have entered a convent and, in tribute to her father's great love, changed her religious name to Beatrice. In 1315, Florence had actually offered Dante the chance to come home. There were conditions. He would have to pay a fine and make a public admission of guilt. He refused, absolutely and without hesitation. He wrote a letter to a friend in Florence explaining his answer. He said, "I can return home if I do so not as a disgraced man, not as someone who has paid a debt for a crime he never committed. If the path back to Florence requires me to bow my head and confess to things I did not do, then I will never return. If I cannot come home with my honor, I will not come home at all." The gates stayed closed. In 1321, Ravenna found itself in conflict with Venice. Guido Novello sent Dante as his diplomatic representative to negotiate with the Venetians. Dante went. He negotiated. He managed to reduce the immediate threat. But on the way home, traveling through a swampy area because the Venetians wouldn't let him take the easier sea route, he contracted malaria. He made it back to Ravenna, but he was sick, and he was getting sicker. On the night of September 13th, 1321, Dante Alighieri died. He was buried in Ravenna with great honor. Guido Novello planned to build him a magnificent tomb. Political upheaval prevented it, but his bones remained. And then, a few decades after his death, Florence woke up. The city that had driven him out, threatened to burn him alive, confiscated his property, lied about him in official documents. That city slowly, painfully realized what it had done. The Divine Comedy had spread across Italy like wildfire. Universities were offering public lectures on it. Cities were competing for the honor of having a famous professor explain Dante's poem to the citizens. Even people who couldn't read were hearing it recited aloud in piazzas. Florence realized it had thrown away the greatest genius it had ever produced, and so began one of the longest and strangest diplomatic disputes in cultural history, Florence's 600-year attempt to get Dante's bones back. Letters were sent to Ravenna. Ravenna refused. Florence asked again. Ravenna refused again. Florence went to the Pope. Pope Leo X, who happened to be a Medici and therefore Florentine, issued a formal decree ordering Ravenna to return the bones. Florence sent a delegation. They arrived at the church of San Francesco where Dante was buried. They opened the tomb. It was empty. The Franciscan friars of Ravenna, having received advance warning that Florence was coming, had secretly broken through the back wall of the tomb, extracted Dante's bones, sealed them in a wooden box, and hidden them in a different location. When Florence came to collect the remains, there was nothing to collect. The bones stayed hidden for decades. Then, during Napoleon's invasion, the friars hid them inside a wall with plaster to keep the French from looting them. The friars who knew the secret died. The location was forgotten. And then, in 1865, 600 years after Dante's birth, during renovation work in Ravenna, a worker broke through a wall and found an old wooden box. On the box, in Latin, were the words, "The bones of Dante." He was reburied in Ravenna with great ceremony, and Ravenna kept him. Florence built an elaborate, beautiful tomb for him in the Basilica of Santa Croce. It has Dante's name on it. It has an effigy of him carved in marble. It has all the trappings of a great monument to a great man. But if you go there today and look inside it, you'll find nothing. The tomb is empty, has always been empty, will always be empty. It is, without anyone intending it to be, the perfect monument to the relationship between Dante and Florence, the city that wanted to possess him, the man who escaped even in death. What do you do with a person like this? He was not a saint. He was petty sometimes. He used his poem to humiliate personal enemies. He sent popes to hell and saved imperial allies. He was a man with grudges and ambitions and wounds that never fully healed. But he was also this, a man who had everything taken from him, who lived in permanent exile, who never saw his home again, and who responded not with violence, not with surrender, but with the largest artistic act of his age. He built a world, an entire cosmology, a map of justice and mercy and love and damnation, populated by everyone he had ever known, from the greatest figures in history to the neighbor down the street. And he wrote it not in the language of scholars and priests, but in the language of ordinary people, the dialect his mother spoke, the dialect the market vendors used, the dialect that was supposed to be too rough, too common, too limited for serious literature. He proved them wrong. So completely, so definitively, that 500 years later, when Italy unified as a nation and needed to choose a national language, they chose the dialect of Dante's poem. He made the language. He made the nation, in a sense. He made the template for how a single creative work can outlast every king and pope and political faction that tried to shape the world. Was he a spiritual visionary? Probably. Was he also an angry exile using poetry as revenge? Absolutely. Was he a man still in love with a woman he barely knew, who had been dead for 30 years? Without question, he was all of those things, and somehow that combination, the spiritual and the personal, the cosmic and the petty, the theological and the political, somehow that combination produced something that no purely spiritual work and no purely personal work could ever have become. He started the journey in a dark forest. Having lost his way, he ended it watching the stars.